2017, moving forward to today, you've deployed this across a multitude of clients, quite a few, obviously,
Yeah.
large and small. From when you started to what you're doing now, what have you learned and what are you doing better?
I think we're asking better questions, right? And we're also coaching our customers not to go too big too fast.
Hmm.
For instance, that example I gave earlier, where 80% of their calls could just do some, gain some improvement through improving the workflow, right? Maybe using something like keyword spotting, intelligent call routing, and some directed dialogue, right? For those of you familiar with that,
Mhm.
they get huge benefits from that, and it's not a natural language deployment. You don't have generative AI in that mix. It's just taking the power of an IVA and applying it to that particular portion of the business. And then if they want to try to expand, go after a new demographic through a new modality or add natural language, they can do it at their own pace. They can add it for a subset, measure it, see how they're doing it, tune and optimize it so that they're gaining the traction they need. They see the benefit that they targeted. And going back to your question, that's what's different now is we're asking the customers like, okay, don't go crazy, right? AI is out there. Natural language may not be for everyone. Let's solve a problem, get some benefit. Let's introduce natural language, but we do it in a controlled, manner so that we can measure success and tune it on a regular basis.
Okay, that's awesome. So, and I can see how that would be the natural progression of rolling out, a disruptive technology. You're trying to disrupt a lot of things, but one thing you're trying not to disrupt is yourself. So maybe we can flow into a conversation around implementation because ultimately for Five9, that's really where you kind of set yourself apart from the rest of the industry. There's a lot of features and functions which are similar between companies and between platforms. Not to say that from a nuanced perspective they do things differently, and they do, but you really feel it differently when you move into implementation. And Five9 has a lot of hardened processes. It's something that you're really good at. So let's talk about implementation, which is really kind of where the rubber meets the road, right? You've come
Right.
out of pre-sales and discovery, and expectations have been set. So this is the first phase of delivering on expectations. Could you maybe give us a feel for an instance where you're working with a customer and you've encountered a very complex customer interaction and you had to unpack that? How did you do it?
Yeah, so the key to our implementation is Studio, right? So Studio is a low-code drag and drop interface. You can essentially, and we've developed what we call nodes, right, that have specific functions. So if you want an integration node, you can pull that over, open it up, and immediately you have some connectors that are already there, Salesforce, ServiceNow. You can very quickly use a RESTful API to connect to others. We've got different kinds of greeting nodes. And so from the development standpoint, it really speeds it up. It's very different than what we used to have to do with Nuance and some others. And so that right there gives us a lot of flexibility. One thing I tell all my partners to do is to implement what they call a distribution node, which is an A/B switch. Put that into every call flow so that you can iterate in future and bring continuous improvement. And it sets in not only their minds, but their customers' minds that this is going to be a journey. It's not a one and done. So philosophically, I wanted to get that on the front end. From a customer deployments perspective, it depends on what they're trying to do. So let's talk about customers that have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
We have one customer, they're in the local government space. And after COVID, and by the way, there's a lot of customers that are in this situation.
Okay.
They had a difficulty finding personnel to manage the 911 and emergency services. And what they wanted to do was focus those individuals, which in many cases takes months, if not years, to train.
Mm-hmm.
High stress job. They're dealing with the public in extreme situations. But
Mm-hmm.
it just so happens because of the way they're organized, many of those contact centers are actually taking non-emergency calls. Right, my car got towed. How do I get it out of Hawk? I got to. How do I get it? How do I file a police report? How do I contact the jail or the justice center? And what are the operating hours of the justice center? Those calls are landing and taking up time in many cases for individuals who really should be dealing with emergencies. So in this particular customer, we said, what are your principal challenges? And they shared them with us. And we said, okay, we've identified five intents because they wanted natural language. And as we started to capture the data, we realized that the five principal reasons that the customer thought people were calling for was actually closer to 12. So
Okay.
then we reiterated and added those. And then we discovered that there was a business operation that they didn't account for because they support other regional police departments. And we said, okay, how do you want to handle this? So in that example, right, because of the relationship we built in and set the expectation, we're able to grow that engagement for the customer and continuously add value because we were using the data captured by the IVA to come back to them and say, did you know that XYZ is happening?
Mm.
In many cases, like, oh, yeah, I did. I just forgot. Or, oh, I didn't think about that. And that's what we see a lot. And that's sort of the purpose of that story is that most of our customers really need help thinking about what they do. They've been doing it for such a long time that they don't always break it out in terms of, all the things that they touch and what the customer experience is, because they're flying at a high level and they're only seeing things that sort of pop up with high frequency, but they forget the 80% of the requirements in that contact center or that customer interaction.
Yeah,
We
and that comes out in implementation, right? So like it's something that wasn't discovered previously, but I like that user story that you gave because as you're explaining it, the first thing that came to mind was this is a triage situation.
correct.
And in that, you have to move quickly because if it is something that needs to go to the city dump, you need to transfer and take that off the line, but and take it down a different path. But if it is something that's truly fits the parameters of a 911 call, then you need to have rapid response on that. Was that a big challenge in this because you couldn't take people through five iterations and tons of questions that cause people to get frustrated or to actually be losing time on a true emergency?
Yeah, so what we did there, we try to do some interception in the front end, and then that's that call deflection. That if it's emergency, let's get that to 911. If it's non-emergency, let's try to manage it with an IVA on a published non-emergency number. So very quickly in the design level, we accounted for that. And then we had other examples. I'll give you one now that may relate to many customers or people listening. So we had another customer that they were selling services and they had two shifts and wanted to, think about bringing on a third shift. And it was almost impossible for them to find people
Mm.
on that third shift. So instead, we replaced the need to hire individuals to work that midnight, to 2 a.m. shift with an IVA. And the IVA essentially would run through a form, capture information, and in the morning, the sales team would actually have a warm lead. And because of that, they were able to, essentially offset the cost of trying to populate a contact center, deal with the high turnover associated with it. But in that need, we knew exactly what the business case was, right? We could take the first and second shift, we could take the questionnaires that they were doing, create it in a format, and be able to turn it not into a handoff to an agent, but into a warm lead that somebody in the morning could then follow up through either voice interaction, email interaction, or some other modality.